Good evening, good evening. One of the more interesting and I think trusted public figures that we have in America today is Warren Buffett. And we all know an awful lot about him and his biography, etc. Over his desk, he has what he calls his one and most important diploma. Now, it is not the diploma from the University of Omaha, which is his home state, and he's given so much money to, and he loves that school, nor is it the diploma from Columbia University, which he tried so hard throughout his life early on to get into. It was always a dream, and he did finally get into it. But that's not what he has up over his desk. What he has up over his desk isn't even really a diploma, it's just a certificate. And it's a certificate from a school that taught just a one-year course in public speaking. He has it where he does in such a place of prominence because he said that everything that was a success in his life, he felt really came down to that. And I would agree. I was a professor for 27 years, and part of my work, you're on all kinds of committees, of course, as professors. And one of my committees was a committee that chose students that would be given a free ride, what they call a trustee scholarship, to Loyola Marymount. So it was worth almost probably $300,000. And you can imagine it was so competitive that these students were the cream of the crop. They were absolutely, in many ways, comparable across the board in everything: test scores, GPA, community service, resume, just everything. And the professorate that chose them, there was about 10 or so professors. It was, of course, a cross-section throughout the university. And time and again, I saw this happen, that the student that everybody voted for was the one who could speak the best to adults. And of course, this was something I would have noticed. I taught speech, I taught theater. Naturally, I would be keyed into that and appreciative of that ability. But it wasn't just me. It was everybody. You would have chemistry professors say of somebody, well, I don't know. She's in the history program and not in chemistry, but she just lit up the room when she started talking about her project. And so early on in my teaching career, I realized this was almost a secret weapon of success, I think. Not just for that situation, but I taught for 27 years. So I got to see students in all sorts of iterations. And by the time I retired, my students were middle-aged. So I could see the arc of lives and how people did. And I can't tell you in the 3 years since I've left teaching and worked on other things, especially this subject, how much I've reflected on. If it came down to one thing I learned as a professor, the key to success is, I think it's the students that could talk equally well to their peers and to adults. And I think you can chart that through lives. Those that can really talk very well with adults, but somehow have trouble with their peers, often may have a certain accomplishment in life and a certain credibility, but there may be something personal that may be a little bit lacking, I would say, I noticed. And the reverse, which is much, much more common, and it's very, very almost epidemic in young people today, which is they can talk to each other, but they can't talk to adults. As a parent, you should know if you have a kid that can't talk to an adult, they're going to have a hard time, from what I saw, just jumping in to a life, in a professional life, successful life, and what I would call public life. Now, when I was so fascinated by this, I thought this is really like a secret weapon, and a secret that if you can teach people, it can really change lives tremendously. And another thing that fascinated me was, speaking is one of the only abilities that everybody can do. Everybody does it naturally. We don't all naturally write all day long. We may text a little, but we don't write. We don't sing. We don't all sing equally. We don't all cook equally. We don't all read equally. But everybody talks. Everybody can communicate. And so I thought, this is not only is it a secret weapon, but everybody has the equipment to do it, and to do it very well. So it became something that I was almost a little bit evangelical about. A lot of times when you talk to people about speaking, they say things like, oh, well, I'm just not a speaker. I'm not a public speaker. Well, you're letting yourself off the hook in a way that's hurtful. To say that I'm not a speaker, oh no, I'm not a speaker, is like saying, oh, I'm not a person. Because when you think about it, your voice or speaking is a metaphor for an awful lot more than just getting up and doing a presentation or reading a church, a toast at a wedding. If you looked in a library and you took every book that had the word voice in the title, voices, very few of them would be about public speaking or about the voice. They would be about something else. They would be about the self, the soul, the entire person, somebody's personhood. So I realized this is something everybody can do. It's a tremendous key to success. And it's also something that can change other aspects of your life. You know, Freud used to call analysis the speaking cure. And you know that many lives can be changed just by that. Or even, you know, how many people have sat at a meeting and said, hello, my name is Ron. I am an alcoholic. And everything changes from that. So I have, in my being on the second mountain, as David Brooks calls this time of life, after you've had one career and you become interested in something, I feel very almost evangelical about this. So it is not about you being a public speaker. And let's just think of the word communicator. And the reason I say that is, a lot, you know, I'm a chatty guy, so I talk all the time. But that doesn't mean that that's what a public speaker is. I don't know if any of you have ever read Susan Cain's book, Quiet. It is a marvelous book, and I'm not a particularly quiet person, but as a teacher, I loved that book, and I often loved quiet students because I thought that I could tell that, I actually could tell how people were learning by how they were listening, not by what they said to me. A lot of times people would BS you after class because they want to make it sound like they were really interested. And they'd be like, oh, Dr. Marasco, that Hamlet is, I really could feel, and I think, okay, that's after class. But while you're looking at them doing a lecture, I could always see in people's eyes how they were listening. And a lot of times quiet people are tremendous communicators. They're often very intuitive, much more than you know. So look, Warren Buffett is not Churchill. He is not an orator, but he understood, I think, this thing that I have come to really feel so deeply, is this is really for everybody. Now, before I get into some very specific, and I'm going to give very specific little tricks, do's, don'ts, and things that I hope will help you. It's important to know that this is a course of study that really has to be done individualized. You know, you don't want Barack Obama to talk like Churchill. You don't want Oprah Winfrey to talk like John Kennedy. And you don't want John Lewis, God rest his soul, to talk like Ellen DeGeneres. These are all different people. So the interesting thing about this course of study, and one of the reasons why I don't think it's done very well in schools, or in a lot of ways done at all, is because there isn't a single standard of excellence. It's very individualized. It's just your own way. It's going to be your own excellence. And so in a lot of ways, it makes it very, very interesting. Now, I'm going to give you some of the technical stuff about this. But before I do, I want to, when Vince Lombardi, the football coach, had people show up at training camp, he would take out a football and he would show it to them. And he would say, gentlemen, this is a football. Take a good look at it. You're not going to see it again for another 2 weeks. And he'd throw it away. And they would sit around a table and they would discuss not running around playing football, but strategy, the structure of the game, the elegance of the game, the intelligence of the game. And they would do that for 2 weeks. So right now, I'm going to take the football of how do you speak, how do you stand, how do you make yourself look like you're not too nervous, and I'm going to throw it away for just a few minutes. The big thing everybody says about speaking is fear. So I can't tell you how many people say, I hear it's the thing people are the most afraid of on earth. And in a lot of ways that may be true. Fear is definitely the big problem and the thing that you want to fix and contend with. And one of the reasons why people let themselves off the hook and say that they're not good speakers or refuse to speak. But fear, in a lot of ways, fear is just very, very intense self-consciousness. You're watching yourself. It was that Richard Burton was once reviewed by a reviewer who said about a moment in a play, on this one word, and he named the word, Richard Burton used an entire octave of his voice. And Richard Burton thought, oh God, he said, I never was able to do that well again because I was so self-conscious. I'd come to that word and I'd be like, oh, that's that word I say so well. And he would sort of freeze up. And we have this happen all the time. If somebody says to you, oh, tell that really funny story you told at the bar. And you're like at your aunt's house, you kind of go, well, I don't know if I can't, I may not be able to do it that well. So you're trying to say, what do I do to fix self-consciousness? Well, this seems so simple, but it really works. Don't think that much about yourself. Think about other things. Think about the audience. Think about who you're talking to. Think about the situation. Like, for example, you know, I'm doing a talk on public speaking, but look, this is Kent at 7:15. You don't want a PowerPoint lecture. This is cocktail hour. I'm an hors d'oeuvre here. So if I had a pointer and I'm not right for the situation. I wouldn't have thought out the situation. It'd be like, oh, these are my important things to say, but it wouldn't be saying I want to connect and do what I think would be helpful to an audience. So you want to think of the other person, the situation. It's really putting yourself more in a mode of not performance, a little bit more in a mode of hospitality. That what do you want to give to them? What do you want to share with them? The word communication, a lot of times when you look at the root of a word, you will find the soul of the word. The root of communication is union, co-union. You're trying to create a little union between people. And so the more you think about what that connection is going to be and what this means, the less you start to watch every single detail about yourself. There's a great scene in the movie The King's Speech, which you know is about a king that stutters. And he goes to a speech teacher. And one of the things he does is he puts headphones on the king and asks him to read a speech, which the first time he does it is very stuttery. And then he stutters, and then he puts on headsets with very loud music playing, and he asks the king to record it a second time. And the second time, there's no stutter. Because the king was so focused on what was happening in his ears that he wasn't self-conscious. He wasn't thinking so much about himself. So that's one of the keys. What happens is when you know you're going to speak, immediately people start to get nervous. It's all about them. It's all about them. But you have to keep in mind this other thing, that if you can care just 51% about those people and connecting with them and what you're saying, 49% you can still be afraid. But as long as the majority, the preponderance goes that way, you are going to be a good speaker. The other thing I want to say is a lot of times people don't really work that much on their material that they want to talk about. And that's a big part of it. Somebody that speaks well, they seem like they mean what they say. Well, but in order to mean what you say, you have to say things that you mean. And that takes a little bit of work. So once you get a speaking assignment of any kind, you have to get up at work, you have to do something, immediately rush home or rush to Staples and get some legal pads and leave them around the house and start jotting notes. Don't judge yourself. Put down anything at all that you may eventually use. To be creative, you really have to be able to be blank, quiet. In some ways, quiet is to creativity like what oxygen is to exercising. It really is maybe one of the most powerful elements. It's very hard to get. And a lot of the reason I think people exercise today and go to the gym is to kind of get in a quiet thinking space. So you do have to spend some time doing that. Get in a quiet thinking space about what you want to talk about. And a lot of people don't do that. They just won't put in the time to that. They hobble together something and then they're nervous. It's a great feeling when you get up in front of people and you know you have plenty of things that you mean to say and you want to say and you're comfortable saying. And don't sell yourself short about what can pop in this blankness, in this quiet. Blankness and quiet are such a key to creativity. You know, I think it's the second, I think it's the second sentence of the Bible is something like, and the earth was unformed and void. So it's almost like, you know, God said, I can make this, but I have to start with blankness and I need void, I need quiet. And what ends up happening is ideas pop and burst. That's how they come. They just pop. But you won't hear the pop if there's a whole lot of other things going on. I used to say this thing to my students all the time. Please do this experiment. Drive somewhere in the car for like upwards of 2 hours. No phone, no radio, no listening to anything, and nobody else in the car with you. I said, if you do that, it's almost impossible not to get an idea, not to have something pop, whether it's, oh, I know what I'll buy for them for their birthday, or, oh, I figured out what I think I should probably do instead of that. So give yourself the time for a little bit of blankness and messiness. Let it be messy. I want to show you something. This is all the legal pads that have been sitting around my house for a talk that I'm going to be giving I'm not even doing this until 2021. But I just jot down a lot of messy ideas, and don't be afraid to be unformed and messy. You know, one of the great things that we have in America, one of the great works of art is the Vietnam Memorial. And it was created by Maya Lin, is the artist's name, but she was a student at Yale at the time and actually won a contest. And she was thinking about what this monument should be. And she was in the Yale cafeteria after having eaten, and she had a big lump on her plate of those, you know, university mashed potatoes that we've all contended with. And she was thinking, and she took a knife and she started to carve into the mashed potatoes this idea for what became the Vietnam Memorial. So you can do that. Don't think that you don't have your own Maya Lin mashed potatoes ideas. You do. Or the crazy Ron Rasco big file of legal pads. Do it however you do it, but don't think that you don't have those ideas. You know, anytime a teacher says something smart, students will always nod, like, and write that down. I used to think, well, what if they're nodding? It means they agree with me. So if they agree with me, it means they must have thought it out already. And a lot of times all I was doing was maybe articulating, or sometimes daring to articulate, something that they had already thought. Ralph Waldo Emerson said, in any work of genius, we recognize our own discarded thoughts. And that happens all the time, where you read something, you think, yeah, yes, I used to think that, but we were afraid to say it. And being a public speaker is about not being afraid to say that. And not just not being afraid to say it, being moved to share it. So now, let me give you your football back. This is Now I want to talk about some of the very specific do's and don'ts. Often I, when I teach public speaking, normally I'm in the room with people, and this is a very different situation. But it's fascinating because one of the things I want to be able to do is now give you some do's and don'ts about how to contend with this odd technology. First and foremost, when you're speaking well, when you're communicating, when you're connecting, what happens is you're forming a kind of chord between you and an audience, or between you and another person. And it's a very fragile, very elusive thing. But when it happens, we all know it. I used to say in a class, sometimes the room changes. When somebody really gets in a zone and you can feel a certain kind of connection. Now that connection is very nerve-wracking. And a lot of us want to avoid that. But that's the key to, I think, being any kind of an entertainer. Actually, the word entertain, if you know Latin or even Spanish, entretener is the mix of it. And entre, as you know from Spanish, means between. And tener, T-E-N-E-R, means to have or to hold. So the actual root of the word entertain means to have or to hold between. And you can feel when it happens in any situation when you say, the person says, you had me in the palm of your hand. Or you say, I didn't connect with them, or I couldn't follow them, or I wasn't with them. So that's what you're trying to create. You're not showing off. You're being who you are. You're trying to make that happen. Part of the reason people don't is it's a very awkward, powerful, very human kind of tingly feeling when you connect in that way. It really is. And I once heard somebody say about working out that when you feel pain while you're working out, he was one of these trainers, and he said, pain is the feeling of weakness leaving your body, which I thought was a very good way to talk about pain of working out. And I will reframe that, and I'll say that little awkward tingle that you can feel between you and another person and you and an audience, that's fear leaving your body. That's fear leaving your psychology. That's fear leaving yourself. And it's a tingle, it's very powerful, but it's also nerve-wracking. And it makes people do one of two things. People that aren't such hot speakers are usually one of two situations. One is they tend to, what I would call cocoon, which is say, I have my words, I'm gonna do my thing, I'm not really gonna look at them, I'm gonna get through this speech, and I'm not gonna connect, I'm gonna do what I'm supposed to do, locked sort of in my own little cocoon here. And you can get through it and you can be fine, but you won't be a great speaker. The reverse is, and a lot of politicians are this, they're not a cocooner, they are a convincer. So what they're doing is not giving you information or forming a communion or a connection with you. What they're doing is trying to convince you they're a certain kind of person. And some of the common ones are, hi, I'm energetic, peppy person, you know, like those infomercials of Australian people selling you cookware, and then you take your rag and you turn it, and it's this, I got energy, I'm happy, I'm peppy. A lot of politicians will do sort of genetic grandiosity. Every single thing has a kind of lifted, I'm grandiose and I'm important. Or nowadays, a very common one is, look how much I care about you. Look at I'm an empathizer, and I want you to know that I'm that kind of a person. I'm trying to convince you I'm that kind of a person. That's not communicating. That's you trying to convince somebody that you're something. And it's a very, very different situation. You want to be you. When you give a speak, don't be Mr. or Mrs. Speaker person. You know, like those, you know, those realtor photographs. Like you think the realtor is going to look like Farrah Fawcett, and then she shows up and it's like Elaine Stritch. You can't be that. You can only be the version of what you are. I think the best you can do when you want to speak is think of these three things. You want to be whoever you are, how you move, how you talk, the kind of person you are. You want to be you, I would say, you free range, the free range you, so it has a little bit of freedom. The second thing is to be grounded. And in some ways that seems paradoxical because you go, wait, I'm going to be free range me, but also grounded. Yes. It's just like saying a car has brakes and a gas pedal. And the way you find the sweet spot of them is the key. So you want to be a sort of free range you feeling free. But also you not apologizing for your voice or your physicality. I actually think I could tell a good actor if I had a 10-second silent movie of an actor walking in a room on a stage, sitting in a chair, 10 seconds. I could tell you the better actor. Because the not so hot actor would have a sense of not only self-consciousness, but apology. They would cross their arms like I'm crossing my arms and I'm sort of here, but should I be? Where the actor looks like they belong. They're grounded. This is one of our great compliments we give to people, that somebody is down to earth or somebody feels grounded. And yet you don't want to be so grounded that you're stiff and stuck. So it's like cooking. You need a little bit of the free range you with a little bit of the grounded you. And then the main thing is, it's the you, but that's just a tiny bit smoother, maybe more graceful, a little bit more credible. Shakespeare says about acting, you must acquire and beget a temperance that will give it smoothness. So whatever your issues are, you want to also add a little bit of a sort of smoothness to that. So you want to smooth that out. But it is always still you. It is not you being fake. Now, there are a few mistakes that I think people make speaking that they make both live and on camera, and we'll talk about on camera in a few minutes. When it comes to the mistakes people make live, and I work with a lot of teachers, there are a lot of teachers who have wrecked their careers in some ways and not created the kind of rapport that they could have created with their students because of a very simple vocal tic. And here's what it is. I want you to imagine that I'm standing up in front of a classroom, and let's say there's 10 students. What some teachers do is they use a volume that fits the room. So when they're talking, they're saying, this is the tone that they use, and it's a volume that fits the whole room. But what they're not doing, which good speakers do, and I think good people do intuitively, although you can always be retaught to do it, is a good speaker, a good person, communicator, speaks to the body of the person, to all of the bodies. So my sound waves don't go past you and through you. If you're a teacher that has 10 students here, and I'm talking like this, then literally my sound waves are going through you. They're not landing on you. They're not touching you. And by making this very simple adjustment, look at the difference between this. Like, you have to remember that we are having a quiz on Monday, everybody. Or say, you have to remember we're having a quiz on Monday, everybody. And just that, it goes into the person and touches them, and it doesn't blow past them. We say about a voice we don't like, I think I mentioned, it goes right through me. And so what you want to do is you always want to aim at just the body of the person and whoever that is. And even if it's somebody far away, my body will know how to adjust to that. If I'm, working in the yard and I'm talking to a friend of mine who's working in another part of the yard, I don't say, what time Monday should I meet you? I'm going to say, what time Monday should I meet you? And I have an intuitive sense of how to reach that person's body, okay? So as a teacher, train yourself not to just speak to the people, to have your sound waves, which actually people can feel and sometimes use them as healing, land on the person, on the people that you're talking to. Your voice just goes to them. Now, as I said before, this is a very individual kind of a work. And so you really have to deal with people individually. When it comes to, if somebody, say, has a bad voice, and there's, I'll tell you what the most common problem is. You also have to know what your voice is for. I am somebody that spent 27 years being a teacher of undergraduate college students who could do a lot of other fun things except listen to me. I never used textbooks, so I always wanted to get across my points, my understanding. And so I tend to have a little bit of a sharper, more driving voice. If I was somebody that was a clinician and my job was more to listen and to get people to talk to me, then I would try to use a different part of myself. I wouldn't want to be as sharp. I think a little bit more of drawing people into me. If you are somebody who tends to cocoon, you should think of going out to the other person. If you're somebody who tends to convince, you should think of sort of, drawing them into you, and making sure that your voice lands on their body. What I would find a lot of times, the very practiced kids would come in for the scholarship interview and they'd be like, well, the main thing that I learned in at AP biology was, instead of saying, well, the main thing I learned in AP biology was, and it made a difference. I knew the trick. The other professors didn't know the trick, but I swear to you, I could just see them go, they are going to vote for her because of the way she spoke to them versus the way somebody else spoke to them. And as I said, I'm a little evangelical about some of these things because they work, I think they really work so well. The main thing that a bad voice has, and there's all different kinds of voices, so don't all of a sudden try to become proper or speak a certain way. The main thing that a bad voice has is it tends to be localized in one part of the body. So when Al Gore would get at his worst and he would get locked up here when he was nervous, it would lock up in here. Or a lot of teachers will have like one part of their body that it seems like every single thing is sort of coming from sort of here. A lot of guys are kind of chesty talkers, They kind of get mansplainy chesty, and so it's that it happens in there. We only do that when we're overly self-conscious and uncomfortable. One of the lousy speakers ever in a lot of ways was Richard Nixon. And he was known for this whole way he'd get all kind of in his face and down here and very jolly. But I did a project on him, and I listened to a tape that Nixon made when he was just for himself on a dictaphone, working on speeches of his own. And he did not talk that way. It wasn't like, oh, yes, you have to remember to talk about the treaty. He didn't do any of that. He spoke like this, was like, the most important thing when you talk about the treaty is to focus on the beginning parts of it. The later parts are not as important. And what that's about is when you're nervous, you tend to form a white knuckle in certain places. And that's where your voice comes out. So you could be somebody that when you're talking, you get very in here and it's a white knuckle and nervous. You probably do it a lot less at home if you catch yourself, or a lot less on the phone. And one of the ways to help yourself is very simple. What you do is you just think of distributing that. A good person talks from the whole self. So if I was working with someone in here, I would just say, no. What about have your voice come from your knees too. Have it come from your back. Have it come from the top of your head. Have it come from there, not just from the one spot. And magically, it's truly magical, when you work with people on redistributing that, you find that it seems like they are a person and not just one single voice in one single caught kink spot. Now, when it comes to this thing that is a little appliance that we have in front of us, two things. You don't think of it as an appliance. You have to think of it as a person. You have to practice with this thing as if I am sitting at a cafe with somebody and I'm talking to them, and I'm talking to them like this. What ends up happening is we get very appliancey, like, yes, hello, is this on? And we get very like it's a piece of machinery. The other thing I will implore you to do, and every time I watch TV, I think, oh, please, I wish people would tell them to do this. The very worst angle to be shot on camera is up like this. So raise your apparatus so that it is at eye level, because otherwise you look like you're a dentist. Everybody's like this talking. So it's like every time I'm Zooming with somebody, it's like, they're my dentist. That's the only person we tend to look at in that view. So try to keep things at eye level. What I have here is up on the box. That's the first thing. Don't be a dentist, eye level. Don't treat it as an appliance. Now, I can tell you, I'm now, because I'm the only thing happening, I'm talking loud enough that I want this to get through. So I'm talking a hair loud. I don't have to talk this loud. This is really would be about right. And if I was sitting at dinner with someone, I was having a conversation, this is how I would talk. And I would talk from this view, and I would be like, are you in there? Are you listening? So you have to sort of imagine it, almost. And in terms of connecting, one of the problems here is that when we look at the face of the person we're talking to, we're looking down. Now I can see the person I'm talking to, but it doesn't look like I'm making eye contact. So this whole time I've been talking to this spot here, which is where the eye contact is. Now, as an actor, people are used to looking in places where it's sort of the trick. So the great piece of technology that would be wonderful and will change the world is when you can stare at the person you're talking to and they can see you at the same eye level. So everybody out in Silicon Valley, work on that and make that useful for us. The other thing I want to mention just very quickly, and then I'm going to get to some questions, is the way people sort of set up for doing Zoom. There are, I've lost so much respect for so many broadcasters on TV once you see their houses, because you think, if you have those lamps, I don't know that I should be listening to your political prognostications. But anyway, what you find people want to do is they want to do a fake thing. They want to set something up. They've created this background with their children and pictures and books. And since every broadcaster is selling a book, they often just happen to have 5 copies of their own book facing out, which again is, I just think it's tacky. And good writers are people that are interested in other things besides themselves. So that's sort of a setup. Is you don't want to do something manipulative like that. But I'll give you a few very quick do's and don'ts, and then I want to go to some questions. Number 1. Work on the lighting and do it by trial and error. Get on a Zoom call with a friend of yours and fool around with a few lamps. I will tell you, I'm not a movie star, but what you're looking at is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 light sources, smaller lamps, to try to get a kind of evenness. And I just worked on it for an hour. When I told a few friends of mine I did this, my phone has been ringing off the hook, and now I'm starting to charge people for helping them do this. Lighting is just by trial and error. You can't light with natural sunlight because you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. And so light is a very, very powerful thing. Let me just show you something. You see this lamp over my head? The bulb that is in that is only 15 watts. I did it just for this. I want to show you how harsh light can be. I'm going to step up and I'm going to turn on a light, and all this is a 60-watt bulb. Watch what happens. You see how powerful that is? So you want to have very little light behind you. Overhead light is probably best, that it kind of gives a sort of even wash. And then over here, all I have is a few regular old house lamps, nothing fancy, that aren't harsh, direct light that's sort of reflective, that kind of, you know, evens you out. So don't be a dentist. Talk like it's another person. Nothing that you do is going to fix the technical stuff. So by screaming at it, it's not going to fix the microphone. Have a background that basically lets people go, oh, I see what that is, but it's not too interesting. Interesting things are going to get a lot of attention. When you look at what you see on my screen now, you see I got some pictures and things there, but it's not close enough that you can see. And for God's sake, don't let people be able to read anything, because they will read it. So if on your bookshelf is, you know, how to quit my gambling addiction, that's a problem. I mean, they're going to read all of that stuff. So you don't want books and things back there that they can read. And the same thing with kids, because people may not be listening to you. They may be saying things like, well, who is that back there? Is that him? Or is that him when he was young? Or does he have that many kids? Or so what you want to give them is something that they could say, oh, well, you look at my place and you say, oh yeah, kind of books, teachery, done. And then your attention will travel to the person that you're talking to. The reason you see this up here is because I have a skylight, and at many times of the day, a light comes in that just casts this extraordinary glow that makes me look divine, but not particularly professorial. And what I found it does is it also kind of creates a sort of focus here, where if I was over there, there's a lot of other things you could be paying attention to, where when I'm here, you're not. So those are a few do's and don'ts. I've talked enough. I want to give people an opportunity to ask me very, very specific questions of any kind.